"You deserve better than me, Megan," Nathan announced to the stunned silence of our private dining room at the summit. His words hung in the air as our closest friends and family froze mid-celebration. He reached across the table, not for my hand, but for Vanessa's. "I've been trying to find the right time to tell you this, but there's never a perfect moment for these things." I watched his face closely, the practiced sincerity in his hazel eyes, the carefully rehearsed apologetic expression. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My brother Tyler's knuckles whitened around his dinner knife, but I remained perfectly calm, taking a slow sip of my champagne. "Actually, Nate," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart, "your timing is impeccable." I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the white tablecloth toward him. "Happy birthday." His brow furrowed in confusion as he opened the folder. I saw the exact moment realization dawned, his face draining of color, eyes widening in disbelief as he processed the documents before him. The controlling stake acquisition papers for Omni Solutions. His company. Now, my company. "What is this?" he whispered, voice suddenly hoarse. "How did you—" "It's simple, really," I replied, lifting my glass in a mock toast. "While you were busy building a future with Vanessa, I was busy securing mine." I smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached my eyes. "You're right about one thing, though. I do deserve better." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never planned to become the kind of woman who would orchestrate a takeover of her husband's company. The Megan Morgan who graduated with honors from Wharton 12 years ago was ambitious, yes, but also idealistic. I believed in partnership, in building something meaningful together with someone who valued me as much as I valued them. That Megan met Nathan Williams at a tech investment conference in San Francisco. He was charismatic, brilliant, and driven. The Kicks, founder of a promising startup called Omni Solutions that was developing innovative supply chain management software. I was a rising star at Horizon Ventures, keen to spot the next unicorn. Our conversation began as professional interest, but quickly evolved into something deeper, more personal. By the end of the weekend, we'd exchanged personal numbers instead of business cards. For 3 years, we built our relationship alongside our careers. I watched with pride as Nate's company grew from a scrappy startup operating out of a converted warehouse to a serious contender in the enterprise software space. He secured his first major client, then his 5th, then his 20th. I celebrated each milestone as if it were my own, offering advice when asked, but mostly providing the emotional bedrock he needed to weather the storms of entrepreneurship. Meanwhile, my own career flourished. I became the youngest partner at Horizon Ventures, with a reputation for spotting undervalued companies with massive growth potential. We were the power couple of Oak Ridge's burgeoning tech scene, ambitious, successful, and seemingly unstoppable together. When Nate proposed on a cliff overlooking the Pacific during a weekend getaway, I didn't hesitate. We were married 6 months. Later in the botanical gardens, surrounded by 150 of our closest friends, family, and, inevitably, business associates. The photos from that day show us beaming, drunk on love and possibility. If someone had shown me a glimpse of the future then, of me sitting in my office after hours, methodically planning the acquisition of my husband's company as revenge for his betrayal, I would have laughed in disbelief. But life has a way of rewriting the stories we tell ourselves. The first 3 years of our marriage maintained the momentum of our courtship. We bought the hillside home, a modernist glass and steel structure that Nate fell in love with instantly. We traveled extensively, combining business and pleasure with effortless fluidity. We discussed children as a future possibility, something to consider once Omni Solutions reached a particular valuation threshold. Looking back now, I realized that should have been my first warning sign. The way Nate approached our relationship as another business plan, with milestones and metrics that needed to be achieved before proceeding to the next phase. But I understood ambition. I respected the dedication required to build something from nothing. And so I waited, focusing on my own work, believing we had all the time in the world. The subtle shift began in our 4th year of marriage. Nate hired Vanessa Porter as Omni's VP of Marketing, bringing her over from one of their biggest competitors. She was undeniably qualified, Ivy League educated with an impressive track record of successful campaigns. She was also undeniably attractive, with a knack for making every man in the room feel like the most fascinating person she'd ever met. I wasn't threatened, not initially. I'd never been the jealous type, and besides, our marriage felt solid, unshakable. But small changes accumulated like sediment in a once clear stream. Nate began working later, scheduling more business dinners, planning more out-of-town strategy, sessions with his executive team. His phone developed a permanent face-down position when at home. His password changed from our anniversary date to something I didn't know. "The board is concerned about security," he explained when I mentioned it casually over breakfast. "We're implementing new protocols company-wide." I nodded, accepting the explanation even as a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something wasn't right. That voice grew louder at the company's holiday party, when I noticed the way Vanessa's hand lingered on Nate's arm as they discussed quarterly projections, the way his eyes followed her across the room when she moved to refresh her drink. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I watched and waited, gathering data points like I would for any investment decision. The late nights grew more frequent. The weekend getaways with the executive team, always including Vanessa, became monthly occurrences. The intimacy between us cooled, replaced by perfunctory conversations about schedules and household logistics. "Is everything okay?" I asked one night as we prepared for bed, two strangers moving around each other with careful choreography. "Just stressed about the Series C funding," Nate replied, not meeting my eyes. "We're close to finalizing, but the terms aren't ideal." I could have pushed harder then. Perhaps I should have. But something held me back. Pride, maybe. Or the increasingly undeniable suspicion that I wouldn't like the answers to my questions. The confirmation came on a rainy Tuesday in February. I'd left a meeting early due to a migraine and returned home unexpectedly. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed a sleek silver Audi parked on the street, Vanessa's car. For a moment, I sat in my own vehicle, rain drumming on the roof, debating whether to drive away and pretend I'd seen nothing. But that had never been my nature. I'd built my career on facing reality head-on, however uncomfortable. The house was quiet when I entered, but there was a half-empty wine glass on the kitchen counter, a red blend from the vineyard we'd visited on our anniversary trip to Sonoma. I moved through the house silently, each step bringing me closer to a truth I already knew. When I reached our bedroom door, I paused, hand hovering over the knob. Inside, I heard Vanessa's laugh, the same one I'd heard at countless company events, but softer now, intimate. Then Nate's voice, murmuring something I couldn't make out, followed by silence. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. Instead, I retreated as quietly as I'd arrived, got back in my car, and drove to Alicia's apartment across town. My oldest friend took one look at my face and wordlessly poured me a generous glass of bourbon. "How long have you suspected?" she asked after I'd explained the situation. "Months," I admitted. "But suspecting and knowing are different things. What are you going to do?" I stared into my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "I don't know yet." But that wasn't entirely true. Already, the analytical part of my brain was whirring to life, assessing options, calculating potential outcomes. Not just for my marriage, but for the financial entanglement that 8 years with Nathan had created. The next morning, I called Diana Patel, the sharpest divorce attorney in Oak Ridge. That same afternoon, I reached out to Harold Bennett, my mentor at Horizon and one of the most respected venture capitalists in the industry. "I need advice, Harold," I said, after explaining the situation in clinical terms, as if discussing a troubled investment rather than my crumbling marriage. Omni Solutions is approaching their Series C. Nate owns 51% of the company. What would it take to acquire a controlling interest? Harold's silence spoke volumes. When he finally responded, his voice was measured. "That would be an unconventional move, Megan. Some might call it vindictive." "I call it strategic," I countered. "Omni has always been undervalued. With the right leadership and resources, it could be worth 3 times its current valuation within 18 months. "And the fact that it's your husband's company?" "Soon-to-be ex-husband," I corrected. "And yes, that's a factor, but not the only one. This is business, Harold. A good opportunity disguised as an emotional decision." After another long pause, Harold sighed. "I'll make some calls. But Megan, be sure this is what you want." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it rarely brings peace. I thanked him and ended the call, already preparing for my next move. What Harold didn't understand was that this wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about reclaiming power in a situation where I'd been made to feel powerless. It was about refusing to be the woman left behind while my husband built a new life with someone else. For the next 6 weeks, I lived a double life. At home, I pretended nothing had changed. I maintained our routine, asked about Nate's day, nodded sympathetically when he complained about investor pressure or implementation challenges with a new client. I didn't confront him about Vanessa. I didn't hint at my knowledge of their affair. Instead, I became a consummate actress playing the role of supportive wife while systematically preparing to dismantle the life we'd built. With Diana, I mapped out a divorce strategy that would protect my assets and maximize my position. With Harold, I developed an acquisition plan for Omni Solutions, focusing on minority shareholders who might be amenable to selling their stakes. I liquidated some of my personal investments, secured a line of credit against my Horizon partnership shares, and cultivated relationships with several of Omni's board members. The pieces fell into place with surprising ease. Perhaps the universe was compensating for the collapse of my personal life by smoothing my professional path. Or perhaps it was simply that I'd unleashed the full force of my strategic capabilities, unhampered by emotional considerations that had previously constrained me. 2 of Omni's early investors were looking to exit before the Series C diluted their shares further. Another board member, concerned about recent performance metrics, was quietly seeking an out. The company's valuation, while impressive for its growth stage, still left room for significant upside, exactly the kind of opportunity I specialized in identifying at Horizon. By the end of March, I had secured commitments for 27% of Omni's shares. Combined with the 5% that Nate had gifted me on our 5th anniversary, "Because we're in this together," he'd said at the time, I was approaching the threshold needed for control. The final piece came from an unexpected source: Justin Hayes, Nate's co-founder and childhood friend. Justin requested a discreet meeting at a coffee shop outside of Oak Ridge, away from the tech community's prying eyes. I'd always liked Justin. He was the technical genius behind Omni's product, while Nate was the visionary frontman. "I know what you're doing," he said without preamble after we'd seated ourselves in a corner table. "And I know why." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean." Justin gave me a look that was equal parts exhaustion and disappointment. "Vanessa isn't the first, Megan. There was someone at the Denver conference last year, and an investor relations consultant before that. I've covered for him more times than I care to admit, and I'm done." The revelation shouldn't have hurt, not after everything, but it did. Not because I still loved Nate, but because it confirmed how thoroughly I'd been deceived, how blind I'd been to the reality of my marriage. "Why are you telling me this?" Justin pushed a folder across the table. "My shares. 19%. I want out, but not if it means leaving the company in Nate's hands. He's brilliant, but he's become reckless, making promises to clients we can't keep, pursuing growth at the expense of our core product integrity. The affair with Vanessa is just a symptom of a larger problem." I stared at the folder, understanding the magnitude of what Justin was offering. "Why me?" "Because you're smart, because you understand the business, and because despite everything, I know you still believe in what we built." He stood, dropping a 20 on the table for our untouched coffees. "Just promise me one thing. When you take control, focus on the company, not on punishing Nate. Omni deserves better than becoming collateral damage in your divorce." With Justin's shares, I had what I needed. Diana finalized the divorce papers while I worked with Harold to structure the acquisition through a special purpose vehicle that would initially mask my identity as the buyer. The timing was critical. I needed the deal to close before Nate realized what was happening, but after I had concrete evidence of his infidelity to strengthen my divorce position. The opportunity presented itself in the form of Nate's upcoming birthday. He was turning 40, and despite the growing distance between us, he still expected the annual celebration I always organized. This year, he requested a private dinner at the summit with our closest friends and his executive team, including, of course, Vanessa. "I have some big announcements to make," he told me, a strange gleam in his eye. "It's time for some changes." I agreed to arrange everything, knowing with cold certainty what those changes entailed. Nate wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to humiliate me by announcing it publicly, on his birthday, in front of everyone who mattered in our lives. The perfect power play, controlling the narrative while appearing vulnerable, positioning himself as the reluctant truth-teller who simply couldn't live a lie any longer. What he didn't know was that I'd received the final acquisition confirmation that morning. As of 9 a.m., I effectively controlled 51% of Omni Solutions through a combination of direct shares and proxies. The disclosure documents were being processed, even as Nate asked me to plan the dinner that would serve as the stage for my public dismissal. I booked the private dining room at the summit, specified Nate's favorite wines, and selected a menu featuring all his preferred dishes. I invited his parents, my family, our closest friends, and key members of Omni's leadership team. I wore the sapphire blue dress he'd always loved, arranged my hair the way he preferred, and arrived early to ensure everything was perfect. And then I waited, outwardly serene, inwardly coiled like a spring, for the moment when my husband would attempt to destroy me, unaware that I had already reclaimed my power. The dinner progressed predictably at first. Cocktails, appetizers, warm conversation punctuated by occasional awkward pauses. When Vanessa and Nate exchanged glances they thought were subtle. My brother Tyler, who had never fully warmed to Nate, watched these interactions with narrowed eyes, occasionally shooting questioning looks in my direction. I gave him reassuring smiles, silently willing him to be patient. As the main course was cleared, Nate tapped his knife against his wine glass, calling for attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning to the birthday celebrant, resplendent in his custom suit and signature confidence. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, flashing the charismatic smile that had helped him secure millions in venture funding. Turning 40 feels like a moment for reflection and honesty, for looking at your life and asking if you're living authentically. I caught my mother's eye across the table. She frowned slightly, sensing something. A miss in his tone. "The truth is," Nate continued, "I haven't been. Living authentically, that is." He paused, scanning the room before his gaze settled on me with practiced regret. "Megan and I have had a wonderful partnership. She's brilliant, supportive, everything a man could want in a wife. But sometimes, life takes us in unexpected directions. That's when he reached for Vanessa's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers on top of the white tablecloth. "You deserve better than me, Megan," he announced, to the stunned silence. His words hung in the air as our guests froze mid-celebration. "I've been trying to find the right time to tell you this, but there's never a perfect moment for these things." I watched his face closely, the practiced sincerity in his hazel eyes, the carefully rehearsed apologetic expression. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Tyler's knuckles whitened around his dinner knife. But I remained perfectly calm, taking a slow sip of my champagne. "Actually, Nate," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart, "your timing is impeccable." I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the white tablecloth toward him. "Happy birthday." His brow furrowed in confusion as he opened the folder. I saw the exact moment realization dawned, his face draining of color, eyes widening in disbelief as he processed the documents before him. The controlling stake acquisition papers for Omni Solutions, his company, now my company. "What is this?" he whispered, voice suddenly hoarse. "How did you—" "It's simple, really," I replied, lifting my glass in a mock toast. "While you were busy building a future with Vanessa, I was busy securing mine." I smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached my eyes. "You're right. About one thing, though. I do deserve better." Vanessa pulled her hand from Nate's, staring at the documents with growing horror. "Nathan, what is she talking about?" Justin, seated at the far end of the table, couldn't suppress a slight smile. "I believe Megan is saying she now controls Omni Solutions." "That's impossible," Nate snapped, flipping through the papers with increasing agitation. "I own 51%. "You did," I corrected gently. "Until quite recently. Check the signatures, Nate. It's all there." His eyes darted across the pages, recognition flashing as he saw Justin's name among the sellers. "You—" He turned to his co-founder, betrayal etched across his features. "How could you?" "Easily," Justin replied, his voice level. "About as easily as you betrayed your wife." Nate turned back to me, shock giving way to anger. "This is insane. You can't run Omni. You don't understand the product, the market." "No?" I interrupted. "Funny, I recall offering quite a bit of insight over the years. Insight you often implemented." I leaned forward slightly. "Did you think I was just being a supportive wife? I'm a venture capitalist, Nate. Evaluating tech companies is what I do." "This won't stand," he threatened, though his voice lacked conviction. "The board won't accept this hostile takeover." "The board already has," I replied. "I spoke with them individually over the past week. They were particularly interested in my plans to address the implementation issues with the Carter account and the ongoing server stability problems that engineering has been struggling with. Oh, and they're quite excited about the strategic partnership I'm bringing with Horizon. We'll be announcing it next quarter." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see our guests processing what they were witnessing, not just the revelation of Nate's affair, but the complete reversal of power happening before their eyes. My mother broke the tension with a short, astonished laugh. "Well," she said, reaching for her wine, "this is certainly more exciting than last year's birthday dinner." Tyler raised his glass to me, pride evident in his expression. "To my sister, always 3 steps ahead." "This isn't over," Nate stated, though the fight was visibly draining from him as the implications of his new reality sank in. "Actually, it is," I replied, standing and gathering my clutch. "The divorce papers will be delivered to your office tomorrow. Don't worry, they're quite fair. I have no interest in punishing you, Nate. As of today, I'm far more interested in running your company than ruining your life." I glanced at Vanessa, who seemed to be shrinking in her chair. Though I should mention there will be some immediate changes to the executive team. I'm sure you understand. I looked around the table at our guests, at the shock, admiration, and confusion painted across their faces. I apologize for the dramatics. It wasn't my intention to disrupt the evening this way, but as Nate said, sometimes life takes us in unexpected directions. With that, I walked out of the private dining room, head high, legs surprisingly steady considering the adrenaline coursing through my system. In the restaurant's elegant lobby, I paused, suddenly aware that I was starting a completely new chapter of my life, one I hadn't planned for, but one that held unexpected promise. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months lifting from my shoulders. My phone buzzed with a text from Alicia. "Well?" I smiled, typing back, "I own a tech company now. Drinks tomorrow?" Then I slipped my phone back into my clutch and hailed a taxi. Not to the hillside house. I'd never spend another night there, but to the downtown hotel where I'd reserved a suite earlier that day. Tomorrow there would be logistics to manage, questions to answer, a company to run. But tonight, I would savor this moment of perfect clarity, this unexpected freedom that had emerged from betrayal. As the taxi pulled away from the summit, I caught a glimpse of Nate through the restaurant's windows, still seated at the table, staring at the documents that represented the end of one life and the beginning of another. For both of us, the aftermath was both simpler and more complicated than I'd anticipated. I awoke the next morning in my hotel suite to dozens of missed calls and messages, from family members checking on me, friends expressing shock or support, board members seeking reassurance, and of course, multiple furious texts from Nate. I ignored them all until I'd showered, ordered room service, and savored a cup of perfectly brewed coffee. Then I called Diana first, confirming that the divorce papers would be delivered to Nate's office that morning. Next, I phoned Harold, thanking him for his assistance and discussing the press release we'd need to craft about Omni's change in leadership. Finally, I called Alicia. "You're a legend," she said the moment she picked up. "Tyler called me last night after the dinner. The whole tech community will be talking about this for years." "That wasn't my intention," I replied, though I couldn't help feeling a small surge of satisfaction. I just needed to take back control. "Well, mission spectacularly accomplished. So what's next, CEO?" The question gave me pause. What was next? I'd been so focused on the acquisition, on the perfect moment of revelation, that I hadn't fully processed the day-to-day reality of what would follow. "I need to meet with the executive team," I said, thinking aloud. "Reassure the employees. Review the financials in detail, and find a new place to live. Start with the last one," Alicia advised. "You need a headquarters for your new life." She was right. I needed a space that was entirely mine, unburdened by memories or associations with Nate. By noon, I'd arranged viewings of 3 downtown apartments, luxurious but practical spaces that would position me closer to Omni's offices. Before heading out, I drafted a company-wide email to Omni's employees, informing them of the change in leadership and assuring them that the company's mission and their positions remained secure. I emphasized my commitment to Omni's success and announced an all-hands meeting for the following day where I would address questions and concerns directly. The response was immediate and varied: confusion, curiosity, and in some cases, cautious optimism. Several employees, particularly women on the technical teams, sent private replies expressing support. It seemed Nate's management style had created more friction than I'd realized. As I was leaving the hotel, my phone rang with a call from Patricia Williams, Nate's mother. I hesitated before answering, unsure what to expect. "Megan?" she began, her voice tight with emotion. "I don't know what to say about last night." "There's nothing to say, Patricia. I'm sorry you and George had to witness that." No, she said firmly. I'm the one who's sorry. For what Nathan did to you. For what he's become. She paused, and I could hear the struggle in her voice. George and I raised him better than this. We thought we did anyway. Her words touched me unexpectedly. In all my strategic planning, I'd given little thought to how Nate's parents would process the public implosion of our marriage and their son's professional downfall. This isn't your fault, I assured her. Nate made his choices. As did you, Patricia replied, a note of something like grudging admiration entering her voice. It was. Quite something what you did. I don't know whether to be horrified or impressed. I laughed despite myself. I'm still figuring that out myself. Well, she continued after a moment, whatever happens next, I want you to know that George and I still consider you family. That doesn't change because Nathan couldn't keep his promises. The conversation left me oddly unsettled as I viewed apartments throughout the afternoon. I'd expected clean breaks, clear delineations between my old life and new, but reality was proving more nuanced. I selected a sleek penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Riverside Park, signing the lease on the spot and arranging for a decorator to furnish it immediately. Money that might have once seemed extravagant now felt like a worthwhile investment in my new beginning. By late afternoon, I was ready to face Omni Solutions directly. The company occupied 3 floors of a downtown office building, a space I'd visited countless times for company events, but would now enter as majority owner and de facto CEO. The security guard did a double take as I approached the reception desk. Mrs. Williams, he greeted me, confusion evident. I didn't know you were expected today. I wasn't scheduled, I replied. But plans change. Would you please let Justin Hayes know I'm here? Minutes later, Justin appeared in the lobby, relief visible on his face. You came, he said simply. Good. The rumors are flying. I imagine they are. Is Nate here? Justin nodded grimly. Holed up in his office since the divorce papers arrived. He's been calling emergency meetings with various executives all day, trying to form a coalition against you. Any success? Limited. Most of the team is in wait-and-see mode. They know Nate's charismatic, but they also respect results. If you can provide stability and a clear vision, they'll follow you. I took a deep breath, straightening my shoulders. Then let's give them that, starting now. Justin led me through the open workspace, where conversations paused and heads turned as we passed. I smiled and nodded, projecting a confidence I wasn't entirely sure I felt. When we reached the executive suite, Justin hesitated. Nate's behind that door, he warned, gesturing to the corner office. Are you ready for this? I've been ready for weeks, I replied, moving past him toward Nate's, my office. I opened the door without knocking to find Nate behind his desk, surrounded by scattered papers, his tie loosened and hair disheveled. With him were Vanessa and 2 other executives, heads bent in intense discussion that ceased the moment I appeared. Gentlemen, I nodded to the executives. I'd like a moment. Alone with Mr. Williams and Ms. Porter, please. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances before quickly excusing themselves, leaving the 3 of us in a triangle of tension. You have no right to be here, Nate began, rising from his chair. I have every right, I countered calmly. As majority, shareholder and incoming CEO, the board has already approved the transition, effective immediately. This is insanity, he sputtered. You can't just walk in and... I can and I am, I interrupted, moving to the visitor chairs and taking a seat, intentionally positioning myself as still the outsider, for now. The question is whether you're going to make this transition more difficult than it needs to be. Vanessa, who had remained silent, finally spoke. I should go, she murmured, gathering her things. Actually, stay, I said. This concerns you too. She sank back into her chair, looking trapped. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, addressing them both. Tomorrow, we'll announce the change in leadership. Nate, you'll be transitioning to an advisory role, non-executive, no decision-making authority, but with a 2-year contract that preserves your public reputation and provides generous compensation. And if I refuse, he challenged, then we announce that you've been removed from your position effective immediately, following concerns about judgment and company governance. The board has already seen the evidence of your conduct, both personal and professional. They're prepared to back my version of events. Nate's face flushed with anger. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? I held his gaze steadily. After you planned to humiliate me publicly? After months of deception? Try me, Nathan. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. And what about me? I turned to her, taking in her expensive blouse, perfect makeup, and the fear behind her confident facade. You have 2 options. Resignation, effective today, with a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement, or termination for cause, which would be considerably less pleasant for everyone involved. You're firing me because of my relationship with Nate, she stated, a hint of defiance in her tone. No, I corrected. I'm firing you because having an affair with the CEO represents poor judgment and a conflict of interest that has potentially impacted company decisions. The marketing strategy revamp that allocated an additional $2 million to your department last quarter, for instance, now looks suspiciously like preferential treatment. Vanessa blanched, and I knew I'd hit the mark. Nate had indeed been diverting resources to her department, possibly to justify their time together. This is personal, Nate insisted, using the company as a weapon in our divorce. It's not personal, I cut him off. It's business, and you're the one who blurred those lines, Nate, not me. I stood, smoothing my skirt. I'll need your decision by 9 a.m. tomorrow, both of you. Advisory role or public removal, resignation or termination. I'm sure you'll make the rational choice. As I turned to leave, Nate called after me. You won't get away with this, Megan. I paused at the door, looking back at the man I had once loved, now a stranger consumed by entitlement and anger. I already have, I replied softly. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start rebuilding. I'm giving you that chance, Nate. It's more than you offered me. I closed the door behind me, heart racing but mind clear. Justin was waiting in the hallway, concern etched on his face. How did it go? About as expected, I replied. Now, show me to my temporary office. We have a company to run. That evening, I checked into a different hotel. I couldn't bear returning to the suite where I'd spent the previous night, too charged with adrenaline and vindication. Now I needed a fresh space for the next phase. Not the triumph, but the real work of reconstruction. As I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, fatigue finally catching up with me, my phone rang with a call from Tyler. How are you holding up, sis? He asked without preamble. I paused, realizing I didn't have a simple answer. I'm recalibrating. That sounds about right, he chuckled. Listen, Mom and Dad want you to know they're here whenever you're ready to talk. They're worried about you. Tell them I'm fine, I replied automatically. Are you, though? Tyler pressed. You pulled off something incredible yesterday, but that doesn't mean you're not allowed to feel the aftershocks. His perception caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of strategic moves and power plays, I'd compartmentalized my emotions, focusing solely on regaining control. But now, alone in the quiet hotel room, I felt the first tremors of delayed grief. Not for the loss of Nate or even our marriage, but for the life I'd thought I was building all these years. I'll be okay, I said finally. I just need time to process everything, to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by being Nate's wife. Well, for starters, You're the badass who outmaneuvered one of Oak Ridge's most notorious negotiators. At his own game, Tyler offered, and I could hear the smile in his voice. There's that, I acknowledged with a small laugh. Seriously, though, my brother continued, his tone softening. Whatever comes next, you're not alone in it. Remember? That. After we hung up, I ordered room service, opened my laptop, and began drafting a strategic plan for Omni's next quarter. Work had always been my refuge, the place where I felt most competent and in control. Now, with personal and professional, suddenly, irrevocably intertwined, I needed that sense of mastery more than ever. I worked until the early hours, mapping out organizational changes, product roadmaps, and potential partnerships. By the time I finally fell into an exhausted sleep, I had the skeleton of a plan that would not only stabilize Omni Solutions after the leadership shock, but potentially accelerate its growth beyond what Nate had ever envisioned. Morning arrived. Too quickly, sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains I'd forgotten to close. My phone showed multiple messages, one from Diana confirming that Nate had received the divorce papers, another from Justin reporting that chatter among employees suggested most were cautiously optimistic about the change, and a third from an unknown number that turned out to be Vanessa. I'll be submitting my resignation this morning, she'd written. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the affair, but for underestimating you so completely. I read the message twice, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. Part of me wanted to maintain the cold professionalism I'd displayed in Nate's office, to keep the emotional high ground. But another part recognized the exhausting futility of sustained anger. Resignation accepted, I replied simply. I wish. You well, Vanessa. Elsewhere. By 8:30, I was back at Omni's offices, dressed in a power suit that I'd had delivered to the hotel. The executive floor was already buzzing with activity, people moving with the nervous energy that accompanies major organizational changes. I'd barely settled into the temporary office Justin had arranged when my assistant, Nate's former assistant, now mine, informed me that Mr. Williams wished to see me. Nate entered without waiting for an invitation, closing the door firmly behind him. He looked better than yesterday, freshly shaven, suit pressed, the outward appearance of control restored. But the tightness around his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. I've decided to accept your offer, he said without preamble. The advisory role. But I have conditions. I leaned back in my chair, regarding him coolly. I'm listening. I want it clearly communicated that this transition was planned, not forced. That it's my decision to step back and focus on innovation while you handle operations. And I want my name to remain on the company. Williams needs to stay in Omni Solutions' official name. His requests were largely cosmetic, designed to preserve his ego and public image rather than maintain actual power. This was the Nate I knew, always concerned with perception, with how things appeared rather than what they actually were. The first condition is acceptable, I conceded. The press release can frame this as a planned transition, but the company name stays as is. Omni Solutions was never legally named after you, Nate. That's not changing now. He bristled, but didn't argue further on that point. And my equity compensation package? The terms in your proposal are insulting compared to standard CEO departures. The terms reflect the circumstances of your departure, I replied evenly. But I'm willing to adjust the vesting schedule if you agree to expedite the divorce proceedings. No contests, no delays, clean separation. Nate's jaw tightened as he processed the trade-off. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I had to, I said simply. You left me no choice. For a brief moment, something like genuine regret flickered across his features. I never meant for it to end this way, Megan. How did you mean, for it to end exactly? With me humiliated in front of our friends and family? With me leaving with nothing while you and Vanessa took over the life we built? He had the grace to look ashamed. It wasn't like that. I just fell out of love. It happens. No, I corrected him. What happens is that people talk about it. They seek counseling. They end relationships with dignity before starting new ones. What you did was cowardly, Nate. And that's why we're here now. Nate stared at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I underestimated you, he said finally. I underestimated you, Nate said finally. I won't make that mistake again. You won't have the opportunity, I replied, glancing at my watch. The board meeting starts in 30 minutes. I expect you'll want to prepare your statement of transition. After he left, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The confrontation had lacked the emotional catharsis I might once have expected. Instead, I felt oddly detached, viewing Nate now as a business problem to solve, rather than the man who had shattered my heart. The all-hands meeting that afternoon was a study in contrasts. I stood at the podium in Omni's largest conference room, facing nearly 200 employees whose expressions ranged from suspicious to curious to openly supportive. Nate sat in the front row, the perfect picture of a founder graciously passing the torch, though I could see the tension in his shoulders, the forced nature of his smile. Many of you know me as Nathan's wife, I began, deliberately using his full name to create distance. Today, I'm speaking to you as Omni's new CEO and majority shareholder. This transition may seem sudden, but I assure you it comes after careful consideration of what's best for the company's future. I outlined my vision for Omni's next chapter: accelerated growth through strategic partnerships, including with Horizon Ventures, renewed focus on product stability before feature expansion, and an organizational restructuring that would prioritize engineering and customer success. Change can be unsettling, I acknowledged, but it also creates opportunity. I'm not here to dismantle what works. I'm here to build on Omni's strengths while addressing areas where we've fallen short. My door is open to anyone with questions or concerns. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before applause broke out, tentative, at first then more confident. As employees filed out, many stopped to introduce themselves or offer brief welcomes. Others clustered around Nate, no doubt seeking reassurance that their positions remained secure. Justin joined me as I gathered my notes. Not bad for your first CEO speech, he remarked. You hit the right balance between continuity and change. Let's hope it translates to actual results, I replied. We have a lot of work ahead. We do, he agreed. But first, you need to settle something. What's that? Where you're going to live tonight. Hotel hopping isn't sustainable, Meg. He was right, of course. I'd been postponing the inevitable, collecting my belongings from the house I'd shared with Nate. The thought of returning there, even briefly, filled me with a peculiar dread. I've leased a new place, I told him, but it won't be ready for a few days. I'll manage until then. Justin shook his head. Stay with Andrea and me. We have the guest suite, and it would make me feel better knowing you're not alone in some impersonal hotel room while you're processing all this. The offer was tempting. Justin's wife, Andrea, had always been kind to me, and their renovated Victorian in the historic district was warm and welcoming. Still, I hesitated, reluctant to impose. Just until your place is ready, Justin pressed. Think of it as your COO ensuring the CEO is properly rested for the challenges ahead. Put that way, how could I refuse? All right, I conceded, but just for a few days. That settled, I spent the remainder of the afternoon in back-to-back meetings with department heads, absorbing information about ongoing projects, team dynamics, and immediate concerns. Every conversation revealed new insights into how Nate had been running the company, some impressive, others troubling. By evening, I was mentally exhausted but clear-eyed about the immediate priorities. Omni had a strong foundation and talented people. But Nate's leadership style had created silos and communication gaps that were hampering efficiency. More concerning were the financial projections for the next 2 quarters, which showed potential cash flow issues if the Series C funding was delayed. Before leaving the office, I called Harold to discuss accelerating Horizon's investment in Omni as part of the strategic partnership we'd planned. "I can present it to the partnership committee next week," he assured me. "But Megan, be prepared for questions about conflict of interest. Your position at Horizon while serving as Omni's CEO creates complications." I'd known this conversation was coming. "I'm planning to take a leave of absence from Horizon," I said, "effective immediately. Omni needs my full attention right now." Harold was silent for a moment. "Are you sure that's what you want? You've worked incredibly hard to reach partner level." "It's not permanent," I clarified. "Just until Omni is stabilized and we can hire a permanent CEO, someone without my personal complications." "And then what? You return to Horizon, as if nothing happened?" It was a question I'd been asking myself. The venture capital world was small, and my unorthodox acquisition of Omni had undoubtedly raised eyebrows. Would clients still trust my judgment? Would partners still want me evaluating their potential investments? "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm taking this one step at a time." "Fair enough," Harold said. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right call focusing on Omni, not just professionally, but personally. Building something new might be exactly what you need right now." Later that evening, settled into Justin and Andrea's guest suite with a small suitcase of hastily purchased essentials, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the day's events. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation with Nate, the board meeting, and the employee address was fading, leaving me hollow and unexpectedly tearful. Andrea knocked softly before entering with a glass of wine. "Thought you might need this," she said, sitting beside me on the edge of the bed. "Quite a day you've had." "Quite a month," I corrected, accepting the wine gratefully. "Thank you for letting me stay. I know it's awkward, given Justin's relationship with Nate." Andrea shook her head firmly. "Justin has been concerned about Nate's choices for a long time, both professionally and personally. What you did took incredible courage, Megan. Don't apologize for it." Her support unleashed something in me, a dam of emotion I'd been carefully containing since finding Vanessa's car in our driveway. Suddenly I was crying, deep wrenching sobs that seemed to come from some hidden reserve of grief I hadn't acknowledged. Andrea simply held me, saying nothing, letting the storm pass naturally. When the tears finally subsided, I felt lighter, as if some essential cleansing had occurred. "I don't even know why I'm crying," I confessed, wiping my eyes. "I'm not sad about losing Nate. Not really." "You're grieving the future you thought you had," Andrea suggested gently. "The life you were building together. That's a real loss, even if the relationship itself wasn't what you believed it to be." Her insight resonated deeply. I had lost something, not just a husband, but a vision of my life, a narrative I'd invested in for 8 years. Now I was starting from scratch, personally if not professionally, and the blank canvas was both liberating and terrifying. "How do I start over at 37? I wondered aloud. Andrea smiled. "One decision at a time. And maybe with a proper meal. Justin's making his famous risotto. Come down when you're ready." After she left, I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the tension of the day. As steam filled the bathroom, I studied my reflection in the mirror, really looked at myself in a way I hadn't in months, maybe years. The woman staring back at me was both familiar and strange. Same green eyes, same high cheekbones, same auburn hair now darkened by water. But there was something different in her expression, a clarity, a determination that hadn't been there before. This was the face of a woman who had reclaimed her power, who had refused to be discarded. The face of someone I was just getting to know. The next morning, I awoke before dawn, my mind already racing with Omni-related tasks and decisions. Rather than fighting it, I slipped out of bed, brewed coffee in the guest suite's small kitchenette, and opened my laptop. By the time Justin knocked on my door to offer a ride to the office, I had drafted a comprehensive 90-day plan for addressing Omni's most pressing issues. "You're going to burn out if you keep this pace," he warned as we drove downtown. "Probably," I agreed, "but right now, work is the best distraction I have." The remainder of the week followed a similar pattern: 14-hour days at the office, dealing with everything from nervous clients to concerned investors to the press, who had quickly caught wind of Omni's unusual leadership change. I gave just one interview to a respected tech industry publication, framing the transition as a natural evolution for the company, while sidestepping questions about my personal relationship with Nate. By Friday, the initial shock had begun to settle into a new normal. Nate had moved out of our office, relocating to a smaller space at the end of the executive corridor. He maintained a cordial, professional demeanor in the handful of interactions we couldn't avoid, though I noticed he scheduled his meetings to minimize the chance of running into me. That afternoon, Diana called with an update on the divorce proceedings. "Nathan's attorney has requested a meeting," she said. "Apparently, he's willing to expedite the process if you'll agree to certain terms." "What kind of terms?" "Most are standard: division of joint assets, tax considerations. But there's one unusual request. He wants you to agree to transition out of Omni's CEO role within 12 months. I frowned. "That's not a divorce issue. That's a company governance matter." "Precisely what I told his counsel," Diana replied, "but he's quite insistent." Reading between the lines, I think Nathan's struggling with the idea of reporting to you, even indirectly, for an extended period. "That's hardly my problem," I said, though in truth, I had no desire to remain Omni's CEO indefinitely. My goal had been to secure control, stabilize the company, and eventually install leadership untainted by our personal drama. "Of course not," Diana agreed. "But if agreeing to a planned transition, on your terms, with your timeline, speeds up the divorce, it might be worth considering." I weighed the proposal. I'll agree to include language about a transition, but without a specific timeline, and contingent on Nathan's full cooperation during whatever period I remain CEO. One hint of undermining me, and all bets are off. "I'll draft the language," Diana promised. "On another note, we should discuss the hillside house. Do you want to maintain ownership or sell?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't given much thought to the house beyond knowing I couldn't live there again. Too many memories, too much Nate in every corner. "Sell it," I decided. "I don't want to fight over furniture or artwork or any of it. We can divide the proceeds and move on." After ending the call, I stood at my office window, looking out over the city skyline. The home Nate and I had shared, with its carefully selected furnishings and meticulously landscaped gardens, had once represented the achievement of a shared dream. Now it felt like an artifact from someone else's life. Beautiful, but no longer relevant to who I was becoming. My phone buzzed with a text from the interior designer handling my new apartment. The furnishings had been delivered ahead of schedule, and the place was ready for occupancy. Attached was a photo of the finished living room, sleek, modern, and utterly unlike the aesthetic I'd shared with Nate. "Perfect," I replied. "I'll move in tonight." Leaving the office early felt like a small act of rebellion against the punishing schedule I'd imposed on myself. I stopped at a boutique to purchase a few essential clothing items, then at a gourmet market for wine and simple provisions. By the time I reached the downtown apartment building, dusk was falling over the city, bathing the glass towers in golden light. The penthouse was exactly as I'd envisioned, spacious yet intimate, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing panoramic views of Oak Ridge. The designer had interpreted my hastily communicated preferences beautifully, creating a space that felt both sophisticated and comfortable. Most importantly, it contained no echoes of my life with Nate. This was a blank slate, an environment, without history or expectations. I moved through the room slowly, familiarizing myself with my new home. The kitchen with its waterfall marble island and professional-grade appliances. The primary bedroom with its platform bed positioned to capture the morning light. The second bedroom converted to a home office, ready for the inevitable late nights and early mornings. In the living room, I opened the wine I'd purchased, a Cabernet from a small vineyard I'd invested in personally years ago, before meeting Nate. As I sipped from a newly purchased glass, I realized this was the first moment of true solitude I'd experienced since the night of Nate's birthday dinner. No hotel staff, no well-meaning friends, no concerned family members checking in. Just me, in a space that was entirely mine, facing a future I was creating step by step. The sensation was disorienting but not unpleasant. For 8 years, my identity had been partially defined by my relationship with Nate, as his girlfriend, his fiancée, his wife. Now I was simply Megan, not Megan Williams, not even Megan Morgan again, at least not legally yet. Just Megan, figuring out who she wanted to be in this unexpected second act. I stepped onto the balcony, letting the cool evening air caress my face. Below, the city pulsed with Friday night energy, couples heading to dinner, friends meeting, for drinks, lives unfolding in their own particular rhythms. Somewhere out there, Nate was adjusting to his new reality too. I wondered briefly where he was staying, who he was with. Was Vanessa still in the picture, now that the affair had cost them both so dearly? Surprisingly, I found I didn't much care. My phone rang, breaking the moment of reflection. It was my mother, checking in as she did daily since the dinner. I hesitated before answering, not quite ready to have my solitude interrupted, but wanting to reassure her. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my tone light. "Good timing. I've just moved into my new place." "That's wonderful, dear," Eleanor replied, relief evident in her voice. "Your father and I have been worried about you hotel hopping. Are you settling in all right?" "I am," I assured her. "It feels good to have a space that's just mine." "I'm glad," she said, then paused. "We saw Patricia at the farmer's market this morning." My stomach tightened. "How was that?" "Strange," Eleanor admitted. "But not hostile. She actually asked how you were doing, said she and George are still processing everything." "I spoke with her briefly after that night," I said. She was surprisingly understanding. "Well, you're not the villain in this story, Megan, regardless of how dramatically things unfolded. Anyone who knows you understands that." Her words, though meant to comfort, struck a dissonant chord. I didn't want to be cast as the wronged woman, the sympathetic character in Oak Ridge's latest social drama. That narrative felt as constraining as any other label I'd worn. "I'm not interested in being anyone's hero or victim," I said more sharply than intended. "I just want to move forward on my own terms." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Of course you do," she finally said. "And you will. But don't shut out the people who love you along the way, Megan. We're not trying to define you. We just want to support you." Her gentle rebuke was deserved. In my determination to assert independence, I'd been holding everyone at arm's length, even those who had never given me reason to doubt their intentions. "You're right," I acknowledged. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm still figuring out how to navigate all this. Would you and Dad like to come see the new place next week? Maybe for dinner?" "We'd love that," she said warmly. "And Megan, I'm proud of you. Not for outsmarting Nathan or taking control of his company, though that was certainly impressive, but for refusing to let his choices determine your worth. That's the daughter we raised." After we hung up, I remained on the balcony, considering her words. Had I really refused to let Nate's betrayal define me? Or had I simply channeled my hurt into a different kind of power play? The line between reclaiming agency and seeking revenge was blurrier than I cared to admit. The weekend passed in a blur of small domestic activities that took on outsized significance in my new circumstances. I arranged and rearranged my limited belongings in the penthouse. I purchased essential items, everything from kitchen basics to bathroom necessities, many of which I'd left behind at the hillside house rather than engage in petty disputes over possessions. I also worked, of course. Omni's challenges didn't observe weekends, and my inbox remained perpetually full with issues requiring the CEO's attention. But I forced myself to maintain some balance, to step away from the laptop periodically, and simply exist in my new space. On Sunday evening, Alicia insisted on a housewarming dinner, arriving with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and 2 bottles of champagne. "This place is gorgeous," she declared, touring the apartment appreciatively. "Very you." "Is it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I'm not sure I know what very me looks like anymore." Alicia gave me a considering look. "It's elegant without being showy. Functional, but beautiful. And it has killer views without being all about the views." She smirked. "Unlike your ex, who was all facade and no substance." I laughed despite myself. "That's not entirely fair. Nate has plenty of substance, just not the kind I thought." "Fair enough," she conceded, uncorking the champagne. "To new beginnings," she toasted once our glasses were filled. "And to finding out who Megan is when she's not Mrs. Nathan Williams." "I'll drink to that," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. After dinner, seated on my new sofa with the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, Alicia broached the subject I'd been avoiding. "Have you thought about dating again? Once the divorce is final, of course." "Honestly? Not even remotely." The idea seemed absurd given the current state of my life. I'm running a company I never planned to lead, finalizing a divorce, and basically reinventing my entire identity. Dating is the last thing on my mind. "I get that," Alicia nodded. "But at some point you might want to consider it. Not to replace Nate or find another relationship right away, but to remind yourself that you're more than your career or your divorce story." "I'll add it to my to-do list," I said dryly. "Right after master quantum physics and learn Mandarin." "All I'm saying is stay open to possibilities," she persisted, "even unexpected ones." I thought of the many unexpected turns my life had already taken in recent months. Trust me, I've learned that lesson thoroughly. Monday morning arrived with a fresh set of challenges. The press release announcing my formal appointment as CEO had generated more attention than anticipated, with several major business publications requesting interviews. The board wanted an updated strategic plan ahead of schedule. And most pressingly, one of Omni's largest clients was threatening to cancel their contract due to concerns about stability following the leadership change. I spent most of the day in crisis management mode, personally calling the wavering client to address their concerns, working with the communications team on a media strategy, and revising the board presentation between back-to-back meetings with various department heads. By late afternoon, I was mentally drained but had successfully contained the immediate fires. The client had agreed to a 6-month extension with specific performance guarantees. The media requests had been triaged into a manageable schedule, and the board presentation was taking shape, though it would require several more hours of work to finalize. I was about to tackle the next item on my endless to-do list when my assistant knocked hesitantly on my office door. "Ms. Morgan, Mr. Williams would like to see you when you have a moment." I glanced at my watch, surprised that Nate was still in the building this late. "Did he say what it's about?" "The Carter implementation," she replied. "Apparently there's an issue with the customization they requested. The Carter account was Omni's largest client and most complex implementation to date. If there were problems developing, I needed to know immediately. Send him in, I said, straightening the papers on my desk and adopting what I hoped was a neutral, professional expression. Nate entered a moment later, looking tired but composed. The visible tension that had characterized our earlier encounters this week had given way to something more resigned, even pragmatic. "Thank you for seeing me," he began formally, taking a seat across from my desk. I wouldn't interrupt, but this could affect our quarterly projections significantly. "What's the issue?" I asked, keeping my tone businesslike. "Carter's CTO called me directly this afternoon," Nate explained. "They're concerned about the timeline for the integration with their legacy systems. Apparently, our team promised a December completion date, but the engineering lead just informed them it's more realistically February or March." I frowned. This was precisely the kind of communication gap I'd been working to address. Promises made to clients without proper validation from the technical teams. "Why did they call you instead of their account manager?" Nate had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I've handled their account personally since we signed them. Mark Davidson, their CTO, and I have a good relationship. Golf buddies," he added with a small shrug. Of course they were. Nate had always excelled at the relationship side of business, cultivating personal connections with key decision-makers. It was one of his genuine strengths as a founder. "What? Did you tell him?" "That I'd consult with our engineering team and get back to him with a realistic assessment and potential solutions." Nate hesitated. "I also said I'd discuss it with you, as you're now making the final calls on resource allocation." It was a small acknowledgement, but significant. Nate publicly recognizing my authority rather than undermining it or making promises he couldn't keep. "Thank you for bringing this to me directly," I said, softening my tone slightly. "I appreciate the heads up." Nate nodded, then seemed to debate whether to say something more. Finally, he spoke. "Megan, I know this situation is unusual. If you'd prefer I step back from client relationships entirely, I understand. But I do think my history with accounts like Carter could be valuable during this transition." It was a reasonable point, and one I'd been considering myself. Despite everything, Nate was an asset to Omni in certain capacities. The challenge was defining a role that utilized his strengths without creating confusion about leadership or reopening personal wounds. "You're right," I acknowledged. "Your relationships with key clients are valuable. Let's discuss a formal arrangement for handling these accounts, with clear communication protocols so everyone understands the decision-making chain." Relief flickered across Nate's features. "That seems fair. I'll have my assistant schedule time for that discussion." As he stood to leave, he paused, one hand on the back of the chair. "For what it's worth, the team seems energized under your leadership. More focused. It's good to see." The compliment caught me off guard. "Thank you," I said simply. Nate nodded once more, then left, closing the door quietly behind him. I stared at the space where he had been, trying to process the interaction. It had felt almost normal. Two executives discussing a business problem without the weight of personal betrayal hanging between them. Was this what the future held? A gradual evolution toward professional civility, the raw emotions of our broken marriage slowly replaced by the more bounded relationship of former spouses who occasionally crossed paths in business settings. The prospect was both reassuring and strangely melancholy. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Dinner tomorrow? I need your advice on something. And I want to hear how CEO life is treating you." "Yes," I replied. "My place at 7? I returned to my work with renewed focus, pushing thoughts of Nate and our complex new dynamic to the back of my mind. The past could not be changed, but the future, both Omni's and my own, was still unwritten, each decision a stroke of the pen shaping the Narrative to come. Later that night, alone in my new apartment with the board presentation finally completed, I stepped onto the balcony once more. The city below was quieter now, Monday evening drawing to a close as lights winked out in office buildings and homes alike. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, feeling something settle within me. Not resolution exactly, but a kind of acceptance. I had not asked for this particular path. I had not wanted my marriage to end in betrayal, my professional life to intertwine so thoroughly with my personal pain. But here I was nonetheless, standing at the threshold of a future I was now free to define on my own terms. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, I felt a genuine spark of curiosity about what lay ahead. Not just the challenges of running Omni or finalizing my divorce, but the greater question of who I might become once the dust settled. The cool woman who had orchestrated a corporate takeover to reclaim her power from a cheating husband was just one version of me, born of specific circumstances, shaped by particular wounds. But she needn't be the final definition. There were other aspects of myself waiting to be explored, other capacities and desires that had nothing to do with Nate or his betrayal. What did I want, beyond the immediate satisfaction of regaining control? What would bring me joy, purpose, fulfillment in this unexpected second act? These were questions I hadn't allowed myself to consider in the whirlwind of recent events. Now, standing alone under the vast night sky, they seemed suddenly, urgently important. The next 6 weeks marked a period of intense transformation, both for Omni Solutions and for me personally. I settled into a rhythm at the company, learning to navigate the complexities of leading an organization where my ex-husband remained a prominent figure. The initial shock of the leadership change gave way to a cautious optimism, as our first quarter under my direction showed promising results. Revenue slightly above projections and client retention higher than anticipated. My relationship with Nate evolved into something I couldn't have imagined during those raw first days. Not friendship, certainly not reconciliation, but a wary professional respect that sometimes surprised us both. We maintained clear boundaries, interacting primarily in scheduled meetings with others present, our personal history carefully compartmentalized from our business dealings. One Thursday afternoon in late April, I was reviewing candidates for the VP of Marketing position, Vanessa's replacement, when Justin knocked on my office door. "Got a minute?" he asked, expression unusually serious. "Of course," I replied, setting aside the resumes. "What's up?" He closed the door and took a seat across from my desk. "I just had an interesting conversation with Westlake Ventures." I raised an eyebrow. Westlake was a mid-sized competitor who'd been making aggressive moves in our market space. "About?" "They're interested in acquiring us." Justin handed me a folder containing the preliminary terms. "Specifically, they approached me because they thought I might be more receptive than you, given the complicated ownership situation." I scanned the proposal, my pulse quickening. The offer was substantial, well above Omni's current valuation, with provisions for earnouts based on performance metrics. "This is a serious offer." "Very serious," Justin agreed, "and frankly, not a bad exit strategy if you're looking for one. You'd make a substantial profit on your shares, get a clean break from Nate, and Omni's technology would find a good home." It was a logical assessment. From a purely financial perspective, accepting Westlake's offer would be a win. I'd turn my hastily arranged acquisition into a significant profit, avoid the complications of running a company where my ex-husband remained involved, and free myself to return to venture capital or pursue other opportunities. Yet something about the proposition felt wrong. "What do you think?" I asked Justin. "Putting aside the ownership dynamics, is this the right move for Omni?" He considered the question carefully. "Westlake has resources we don't, a larger sales force, more established client relationships in certain sectors. A merger could accelerate our growth." He paused. But we'd lose autonomy. Our product would become part of their suite, our team absorbed into their culture. Some of what makes Omni special would inevitably be lost. And what makes us special, in your view? Justin smiled slightly. Our focus on the user experience, for one. The way we actually listen to client feedback instead of just paying lip service to it. The culture of innovation we've maintained even as we've grown. He shrugged. Intangibles, maybe, but important ones. I nodded, turning back to the proposal. Does Nate know about this? Not from me, Justin replied. But I wouldn't be surprised if Westlake approached him separately. He still has considerable stake in the company. I'll think about it, I said, tucking the folder into my drawer. Let's keep this between us for now. After Justin left, I found myself unable to focus on the marketing candidates. The acquisition offer had stirred up complicated feelings. On one level, it represented an elegant solution to my entanglement with Omni and, by extension, with Nate. I could walk away with a substantial financial win and the satisfaction of having proven my capabilities as a leader during a critical transition. But there was something else, too. A reluctance to relinquish what I'd only just begun to build. In the short time I'd been CEO, I'd implemented changes that were starting to bear fruit. Restructuring the client onboarding process, establishing clearer communication channels between departments, re-energizing the product development roadmap. The company was responding well to my leadership style, which emphasized transparency and accountability over the charismatic but sometimes erratic approach Nate had employed. More personally, Omni had become a focal point in my reconstruction, a place where I was defined by my capabilities rather than my marital status or the scandal of Nate's betrayal. Walking away now felt somehow like conceding that I'd been motivated solely by revenge rather than by a genuine belief in what the company could become. My thoughts were interrupted by a text from Diana. Settlement agreement finalized. Need your signature tomorrow to proceed. We did well. Celebratory lunch? The divorce was concluding with less drama than I'd anticipated. Nate had ultimately accepted my terms with minimal pushback, perhaps recognizing the futility of prolonging a legal battle he was unlikely to win, or perhaps genuinely wanting to move forward with his life. Either way, the process had been relatively smooth. The division of assets straightforward, given our prenuptial agreement and mutual desire for a clean break. Yes to lunch, I replied. The Westlake offer would complicate things if it came to fruition, potentially requiring a renegotiation of certain financial aspects of our settlement. But that was a bridge to cross if and when we reached it. That evening, I found myself reluctant to return to my empty penthouse. Despite its beautiful design and breathtaking views, the apartment still felt more like accommodations than a home, a temporary way station rather than a place where I was putting down roots. I'd done little to personalize it beyond the designer's initial vision, adding few personal touches or meaningful objects. On impulse, I texted Alicia, "Drink at Riverview in 30?" The upscale bar on the 20th floor of the downtown Meridian Hotel offered panoramic views of the river that bisected Oak Ridge, along with excellent martinis and relative privacy for its patrons. Alicia and I had frequented it during our younger days before marriages and careers had begun to constrain our spontaneity. "Already there," she texted back. "Rough day?" I smiled at her predictive abilities. Just need adult conversation that doesn't involve profit margins. When I arrived, Alicia had secured a corner table with prime views of the sunset reflecting off the river. She was already nursing a Cosempton, her preferred indulgence. "You look exhausted," she greeted me candidly. In a powerful, executive kind of way, but still. "When's the last time you took a day off?" "What day is it again?" I joked, settling into the plush chair across from her. "Honestly, I'm not sure. The weeks have blurred together." "That's not sustainable, Meg," she said, her tone softening. "Even corporate warriors need downtime." I signaled the waiter for a gin martini, then turned back to my oldest friend. I know. It's just, walking away feels like admitting I can't handle it. Walking away from what? The office at a reasonable hour? Taking a weekend to yourself? That's not weakness. It's basic self-care. You sound like my mother, I grumbled. Your mother is a very wise woman, Alicia replied with a grin. Seriously, though, you've proven your point. You've shown Nate, the board, the entire tech community that you're more than capable of running Omni. Now you need to show yourself that you're more than just your job. Her words resonated uncomfortably. Had I simply replaced one form of identity reliance with another? First, defining myself as Nate's wife, now as Omni's CEO? There's something else, I said, deciding to confide in her about the Westlake offer, an acquisition possibility that would let me exit gracefully, with a significant profit. Alicia listened thoughtfully as I outlined the proposal and my conflicted reaction to it. When I finished, she sat back, considering. What does your gut tell you? She asked simply. That it's too soon to sell, I admitted. That there's more I want to accomplish with Omni before letting it go. Then there's your answer. She leaned forward, brown eyes intent. But Megan, whatever you decide about Omni, you need to start building a life outside of it. When was the last time you did something just for the joy of it? Something that had nothing to do with work or your divorce or proving anything to anyone? I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing I didn't have a ready answer. The past months had been so focused on survival, on regaining control, on establishing myself in my new role, that I'd neglected other aspects of myself entirely. That's what I thought, Alicia said gently. The best revenge isn't taking Nate's company or showing the world how successful you can be without him. It's being genuinely happy. Building a life so full and authentic that what happened with him becomes just a footnote in your story, not the defining chapter. When did you get so wise? I asked, attempting humor to mask how deeply her words had struck me. I've always been wise, she replied with a wink. You were just too busy being the smart one to notice. By the time I returned to my apartment, several hours and 2 martinis later, Alicia's advice was still circling in my mind. She was right. I had been so focused on proving myself professionally that I'd neglected the equally important task of rediscovering who I was beyond my career, beyond my former marriage. Standing in my pristine kitchen, I made an impulsive decision. I would take the weekend off, completely off, no checking email, no working on presentations or financial projections. Instead, I would do. What exactly? The question itself was revealing. I had forgotten how to structure time that wasn't dedicated to work or social obligations. What had I enjoyed before my life became consumed by Omni and the aftermath of Nate's betrayal? Reading for pleasure, certainly. Not business books or industry reports, but novels that transported me to other worlds and perspectives. Hiking in the mountains north of Oak Ridge. Cooking elaborate meals from scratch, something I'd largely abandoned as Nate's, and my schedules grew increasingly hectic. Simple pleasures, perhaps, but authentic ones. Starting points for rebuilding a life that included joy as a priority, not just achievement. Friday morning, I shocked my assistant by informing her I would be unreachable until Monday. I cleared my calendar, delegated pressing matters to appropriate team members, and left the office by noon, ignoring the startled glances as I walked through the open workspace hours earlier than usual. My first stop was a bookstore, where I selected 3 novels purely based on what intrigued me rather than what might impress others in a business context. Next, I visited a specialty food market, filling my basket with ingredients for dishes I'd been wanting to try. Finally, I stopped at a home goods boutique and impulsively purchased items that spoke to me. A hand-painted ceramic vase, a soft throw blanket in rich jewel tones, framed art that resonated with something inside me. By the time I returned to my penthouse, arms laden with packages, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't experienced in months. The apartment would never be the hillside house. That chapter was closed. But it could become a true home, a reflection of this new phase of my life. I spent the afternoon rearranging furniture, positioning my new purchases throughout the space, and finally unpacking the few personal items I'd brought from my previous life. Family photographs, a collection of vintage bookends, the handmade quilt my grandmother had created for my college graduation. By evening, the penthouse felt transformed, still elegant and modern, but now with touches of warmth and personality that made it unmistakably mine. The weekend unfolded with a sense of liberation I hadn't anticipated. I lost myself in fiction, hiked a challenging trail in a nearby state park, experimented with complex recipes, and even indulged in the luxury of an afternoon nap. Each activity, trivial as it might seem in the context of running a multi-million-dollar company, helped reconnect me with aspects of myself I'd neglected. By Sunday evening, I felt more centered than I had in months, possibly years. The constant hum of anxiety that had become my baseline state had quieted to a manageable whisper. I could think about Nate without anger rising like bile in my throat. I could contemplate Omni's future without feeling that my entire identity hinged on its success. Monday morning arrived with its usual demands, but I approached them differently, more deliberately, with clearer boundaries. I scheduled time blocks for focused work, ensured breaks for meals away from my desk, and set a firm departure time for the evening. The company wouldn't collapse if I practiced sustainable leadership rather than martyring myself on the altar of ceaseless productivity. The week brought developments on multiple fronts. Diana and I finalized the divorce settlement over lunch on Tuesday, officially ending my marriage to Nate. The papers were signed with less emotion than I might have expected, a business-like conclusion to a relationship that had, in the end, been revealed as more transactional than I'd wanted to believe. "How does it feel?" Diana asked as we toasted with champagne. "To be officially unattached?" I considered the question seriously. "Lighter," I decided. "Like I've set down a heavy suitcase I'd been carrying for too long." "And Omni? Are you going to pursue the Westlake offer?" "Not immediately," I said. "I want more time to build value before considering an exit." Diana nodded approvingly. "Wise choice. Strike when you're in a position of maximum leverage." The conversation shifted to other topics. Diana's recent vacation in Portugal, a mutual friend's engagement, the upcoming summer arts festival in Oak Ridge's revitalized downtown. Normal life continuing, evolving, as it always did regardless, of personal upheavals. Wednesday brought a surprise visitor to Omni. Harold Bennett, my mentor from Horizon Ventures, appeared unannounced at reception asking to see me. "This is an unexpected pleasure," I greeted him, genuinely glad to see the man who had guided my career for over a decade. "What brings you to our humble headquarters?" Harold's silver hair and impeccable suit commanded respect, but his eyes held the warmth they always had when we spoke. "Can't an old man check in on his protégé without an ulterior motive?" "He can," I laughed, gesturing for him to take a seat. "But in my experience, you usually have at least 2 or 3 ulterior motives for everything you do." "You know me too well," he conceded with a chuckle. "All right, cards on the table. I've heard about Westlake's interest in acquiring Omni." I shouldn't have been surprised. Harold had connections throughout the industry and an uncanny ability to detect potential deals before they became public knowledge. "News travels fast," I observed neutrally. "In our world? Always." He leaned forward, expression turning serious. "Megan, before you make any decisions, I want you to consider an alternative proposition. Horizon is interested in taking a significant minority position in Omni, not control, but enough to provide growth capital and strategic support." The proposal caught me off guard. Horizon as an investor rather than facilitating an acquisition? Harold nodded. "We've been watching Omni's performance under your leadership. The operational improvements you've implemented in just a few months are impressive. The board believes there's substantial untapped potential here, especially with the right backing. And my role at Horizon? We discussed a leave of absence, not a permanent departure. That's where things get interesting, Harold replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We're proposing a unique arrangement. You would remain Omni's CEO for at least the next 2 years, focusing on executing your growth strategy. After that, assuming key milestones are met, you would have the option to return to Horizon as a managing partner, with Omni as part of your investment portfolio. The proposal was elegant, a path that would allow me to complete what I'd started at Omni while eventually returning to venture capital in a more senior role. It would also provide the capital Omni needed for expansion without surrendering control to a competitor like Westlake. What about Nate? I asked, the question unavoidable. He's still a significant shareholder, and we've just finalized our divorce. We've anticipated that complication, Harold assured me. Part of our proposal includes an offer to buy out his remaining shares at a premium, enough to make it financially attractive for him to exit completely. From our conversations with him, we believe he's receptive to the idea. You've spoken with him already. I tried to keep the surprise from my voice. Preliminary discussions only, Harold clarified. He understands this would require your agreement as majority shareholder. But yes, he expressed interest in a clean break that would allow him to pursue new ventures. The revelation wasn't entirely surprising. Despite our carefully constructed professional detente, Nate had seemed increasingly restless at Omni, present physically but emotionally distant, his entrepreneurial spirit chafing under the constraints of advisory status in a company he'd founded but no longer controlled. I'd need to review the full proposal, I said cautiously, and discuss it with the board. Of course, Harold agreed, producing a sealed envelope from his briefcase. All the details are here, including the valuation methodology and proposed governance structure. Take your time, Megan. This isn't a decision to rush. After Harold left, I sat with the sealed envelope on my desk, contemplating the path forward. Horizon's proposal offered an elegant solution to several challenges: capital for growth, a graceful exit for Nate, and a defined trajectory for my own career. Yet it also represented another significant change at a time when I was just beginning to find my footing. I was still considering the implications when Justin knocked on my open door. Harold Bennett just left looking pleased with himself, he observed. Anything I should know about? I hesitated only briefly before inviting him in and sharing the outline of Horizon's proposal. Justin was not just my COO, but had become a trusted ally in navigating Omni's post-Nate evolution. His perspective would be valuable. Justin whistled, low after I finished describing the offer. It's a strong proposal, better than Westlake's, if you're thinking beyond the immediate exit. That's my initial assessment too, I agreed. But I'm concerned about change fatigue among the team. We've already been through so much transition. True, he acknowledged. But positioning this as growth capital rather than another ownership change could make a difference in how it's perceived. And honestly, having Nate completely out of the picture might help stabilize things more than you'd expect. You think his presence is still disruptive? Justin chose his words carefully. Not intentionally. But there's an unavoidable awkwardness that affects everyone. Team members are constantly navigating the dynamics between you two, unsure where ultimate authority rests despite your official position. A clean break would clarity those lines permanently. His assessment was fair. Despite our best efforts to maintain professionalism, the lingering tension between Nate and me created subtle undercurrents throughout the organization. Hesitant conversations that paused when one of us entered a room, debates about whether to include both of us in certain meetings, the occasional competing directional guidance that confused team members caught in the middle. What about you? I asked. How would you feel about Horizon as an investor and Nate exiting completely? Professionally? I think it's the right move for Omni at this stage. He paused. Personally, it would be strange. Nate and I built this place from nothing. But companies evolve, and sometimes founders need to step away for that evolution to continue. I nodded, appreciating his honesty. I'll review the full proposal tonight and we can discuss it more tomorrow. In the meantime, absolute discretion, Justin finished for me. No one needs to know we're considering this until decisions are made. That evening in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and opened Harold's envelope, spreading the contents across my dining table. The proposal was comprehensive, as I'd expected from Horizon. Detailed financial projections, governance recommendations, milestones tied to additional funding tranches. The valuation was fair, perhaps even generous, reflecting Harold's belief in Omni's potential under the right leadership. The section addressing Nate's exit was particularly interesting. Horizon proposed buying his shares at a 15% premium to current valuation, contingent on a non-compete agreement that would prevent him from starting or joining a direct competitor for 3 years. It was a golden handcuffs arrangement that would give him financial freedom while protecting Omni's market position during a critical growth phase. As I reviewed the documents, my phone chimed with a text from an unexpected source, Nate himself. Heard Harold visited today. Can we talk? No. Agenda beyond clearing the air. The message gave me pause. In the week since our divorce was finalized, Nate and I had maintained strictly professional communication, limited to Omni-related matters and conducted primarily in group settings. A private conversation, to clear the air, represented a departure from our unspoken protocol. Yet, if Horizon's proposal moved forward, we would need to address our personal history more directly than we had been willing to do so far. Perhaps this was an opportunity to begin that process on neutral ground. After brief consideration, I replied, "Tomorrow, lunch at Riverside Terrace, 1 p.m. It was a public venue, but afforded enough privacy for a sensitive conversation, the perfect middle ground between the intimacy of a private meeting and the safety of a crowd." "Agreed," he responded simply. "Thank you." I returned to the proposal, analyzing projections and terms until nearly midnight. By the time I finally prepared for bed, I had reached a tentative conclusion. Horizon's offer aligned with my vision for Omni's future and provided the cleanest possible resolution to the complex entanglement with Nate that my impulsive acquisition had created. There were details to negotiate, terms to refine, but the fundamental structure made sense both commercially and personally. The next morning brought a new complication. The Carter account, Omni's largest client, and the one Nate had warned me about months earlier, was experiencing implementation issues that threatened the entire project timeline. The technical team had been working through the night to identify the root cause, but the client was understandably concerned. "They've requested an emergency meeting with leadership," Justin informed me as we huddled in my office with the engineering director. "Specifically, they asked for both you and Nate to attend." I glanced at my watch. It was just past 10, giving us nearly 3 hours before my scheduled lunch with Nate. "Set it up for 11, I decided. I want our technical team to have at least a preliminary diagnosis before we go in." "Already done," Justin nodded. "Conference room A is reserved. I've briefed Nate on the situation, and he's reviewing the latest logs from their system." The client meeting was tense, but ultimately productive. The Carter implementation had encountered integration issues with their legacy databases, problems that were solvable but would require additional development time and resources. Nate and I presented a united front, each leveraging our particular strengths. His deep historical knowledge of the client relationship and technical architecture, my strategic perspective on resource allocation and timeline management. By the meeting's end, We had negotiated a revised implementation schedule with clear milestones and communication protocols. The client representatives left cautiously satisfied, and our team had a concrete action plan to address the issues. As the room cleared, Nate lingered, checking his watch. "We still on for lunch?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I confirmed. "I could use the break after that session." We walked to Riverside Terrace separately, a habit developed to minimize office, gossip about our interactions, and arrived within minutes of each other. The outdoor restaurant overlooking the river was busy with the lunch crowd, but the hostess led us to a relatively secluded table beneath a canvas awning. After ordering drinks, sparkling water for me, iced tea for Nate, we sat in awkward silence. For a moment, the weight of our shared history and uncertain future hanging between us. "You handled the Carter situation well," Nate finally offered. "They've always responded better to straight talk than reassurances." "We handled it well," I corrected. "Your technical insight was crucial. I couldn't have addressed their concerns so specifically without it." He nodded, accepting the professional compliment without comment. Another silence stretched between us, more uncomfortable than the first. "This is strange, isn't it?" Nate said eventually, a rueful smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "After everything, sitting here like civilized adults discussing work as if you hadn't betrayed me and I hadn't taken over your company?" I finished for him, more bluntly than I'd intended. To my surprise, Nate laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard from him in months. Exactly that, not exactly a conventional divorce narrative. His unexpected humor broke something in me, a lingering tension I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I found myself smiling in response, the absurdity of our situation suddenly striking me with full force. "We never did anything the conventional way, did we?" I remarked. "Not once," he agreed, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Two unconventional endings." I clinked my water against his tea, and new beginnings. The words came naturally, without the bitterness I might have expected even weeks earlier. Our food arrived, a salad for me, sandwich for him, providing a momentary reprieve from conversation. When we resumed, Nate's tone was more serious. "Harold talked to you about Horizon's proposal?" "Yes," I confirmed. "It's an interesting opportunity. For the company and for both of us, potentially." Nate nodded slowly. "I think it might be the right move, Megan. For Omni to grow the way it should and for us to disentangle." "You'd be leaving the company entirely," I observed. "Are you ready for that?" He considered the question thoughtfully. 6 months. Ago? No. But now? He shrugged. "Omni's in good hands. The team respects you, the clients trust you, and I've realized recently that I miss the early stages of building something. The creativity, the possibility, the hunger. I've had some ideas percolating." "A new venture?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Early conceptual stage," he admitted. "But yes, something in the education technology space. The Horizon deal would give me the capital and runway to explore it properly." I studied him across the table. This man who had been the center of my world for 8 years and was now becoming someone I observed with increasing detachment, not with anger or hurt, but with the clear-eyed assessment of someone stepping back from a painting to see its full composition. "I think you should pursue it," I said sincerely. "You've always been at your best when building something new." "Thank you," he replied, seeming genuinely touched by my endorsement. "That means more than you might expect." We finished our meal discussing practical matters: how to approach the board about Horizon's proposal, the messaging for employees and clients, the timeline for implementation if we decided to proceed. It was the most substantial, honest conversation we'd had since the night of his birthday dinner, though conducted in an entirely different register. Collaborative rather than confrontational, forward-looking rather than mired in past betrayals. As we prepared to leave, Nate hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic vulnerability. For what it's worth, Megan, I'm sorry. Not just for Vanessa, though obviously for that, but for how I treated you in the years before. The small dismissals, the taking you for granted. You deserved better. The apology caught me off guard. It was more self-aware than I'd expected from him, acknowledging not just the affair, but the pattern of behavior that had eroded our marriage long before Vanessa entered the picture. Thank you for saying that, I replied after a moment. It doesn't change what happened, but I appreciate the recognition. He nodded, accepting the limited absolution I was able to offer. Good luck with the board presentation tomorrow. For what it's worth, I think Horizon's proposal is the right path forward, for Omni and for both of us. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, I felt a curious sense of closure. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind I might once have imagined, but something quieter and more nuanced. The conversation hadn't erased the hurt or undone the betrayal, but it had shifted something fundamental in how I viewed both Nate and our shared history. Perhaps this was what moving forward truly looked like. Not a complete erasure of the past, but a gradual recategorizing of its significance, its power, to define the present moment, diminishing with each step into a future of my own design. The board meeting the following day marked a turning point for Omni Solutions and for my own journey of redefinition. The presentation of Horizon's investment proposal unfolded more smoothly than I had anticipated. With Harold's poised articulation of the financial benefits and my clear vision for Omni's future, the board members responded with enthusiasm rather than hesitation. This partnership allows us to accelerate growth while maintaining our core identity, I explained, standing before the projector screen displaying our 5-year forecast. The capital infusion addresses our immediate expansion needs without diluting our company culture or compromising our product direction. Thomas Wexler, the most conservative member of the board, leaned forward with interest. And Mr. Williams is comfortable with this arrangement? His complete exit from the company he founded? I glanced at Nate, who had insisted on attending, despite not being required for the presentation. We had agreed he would address this question directly to eliminate any perception of coercion. More than comfortable, Nate replied, his voice steady. I believe this is the right evolution for Omni. The company needs consistent leadership with a clear mandate, which Megan has proven capable of providing. My interests have shifted toward new ventures, and this arrangement benefits all parties. His endorsement carried weight, particularly with the board members who had been his early supporters. By the meeting's end, we had tentative approval to proceed with due diligence, with a final vote scheduled for the following month. As the board members filed out of the conference room, Harold lingered behind, his expression pleased but contemplative. That went well, he observed once we were alone. Better than expected. The proposal sells itself, I replied, gathering my materials. It's the right move for Omni at this juncture. Harold shook his head slightly. The proposal is solid. Yes, but what sold the board was your command of the room, Megan. The confidence you've developed in this role. It's remarkable given the circumstances of your appointment. His observation gave me pause. Had I changed so noticeably in the months since taking over Omni? The woman who had orchestrated the takeover had been fueled by anger and determination. Strategic, but reactive. The person who stood before the board today felt more deliberate, more centered in her own authority. I've had to adapt quickly, I acknowledged. You've done more than adapt, Harold said with uncharacteristic directness. You've transformed, both the company and yourself. It's impressive to witness. The compliment from my longtime mentor meant more than I expected. Harold had seen me at every stage of my professional journey, from ambitious associate to youngest partner in Horizon's history. His recognition of this evolution affirmed something I had been feeling, but hadn't fully articulated. Thank you, I said simply. Harold consulted his watch. I have another appointment across town. We'll talk tomorrow about next steps? After he left, I remained in the conference room, taking a moment to absorb the significance of what had just occurred. The Horizon partnership, if finalized, would reshape Omni's trajectory and provide definitive resolution to the unorthodox situation I had created months ago. The takeover that had begun as an act of self-preservation, a desperate grab for control in the wake of betrayal, had evolved into something more considered, more forward-looking. I was no longer merely reacting to Nate's actions, but actively designing a future that made strategic sense for the company and for my own professional path. My phone chimed with a text from Diana. Divorce decree officially filed with the court. You are officially a free woman. Congratulations. The news felt anticlimactic after everything else, a formal acknowledgement of what had already emotionally concluded. Still, there was something meaningful about the legal recognition that my marriage was truly, finally over. Thank you for everything, I replied. Definitely cause for celebration. Dinner next week? As I gathered my materials to leave the conference room, Nate appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Do you have a minute? He asked tentatively. I gestured to the chair across from me, curious about what he wanted to discuss after his surprisingly supportive presentation to the board. I've been thinking about logistics, he began once seated. Assuming the Horizon deal goes through, I'll be exiting Omni completely within 60 days. That means I should start planning my transition now. That seems prudent, I agreed. Do you have specific concerns? Not concerns exactly, more loose ends. He hesitated. The Carter account, for instance. They've worked directly with me since the beginning. The handoff needs to be handled carefully. I've already started identifying potential account executives with the right technical knowledge and relationship skills, I assured him. We could arrange joint meetings over the next few weeks to facilitate a smooth transition. Nate nodded. That makes sense. There's also the Westridge Innovation Center project. I've been the primary liaison with their R&D team. We spent the next half hour mapping out a transition plan for Nate's remaining responsibilities. Client, relationships, internal projects, and institutional knowledge that hadn't been properly documented. The conversation was entirely professional, focused on Omni's needs rather than our personal history. As we concluded, Nate paused, seeming to debate whether to say something more. This is strange to admit, he finally said, but I'm actually excited about what comes next. For Omni under your leadership, and for my own new chapter. The candor in his voice suggested genuine self-reflection rather than performative politeness. I studied him for a moment, trying to reconcile this self-aware, forward-looking man with the husband who had betrayed me so thoroughly. I think that's healthy, I replied carefully, for both of us to be looking ahead rather than behind. Vanessa and I aren't together, by the way, he added abruptly. I don't know if you knew that or cared, but it ended weeks ago. The revelation wasn't entirely surprising. Affairs born in deception rarely survived exposure to daylight and consequences. Still, I was uncertain how to respond or why Nate felt compelled to share this information. I didn't know, I said neutrally. But that's your personal business, Nate. You don't owe me updates on your love life. I know, he acknowledged. He shrugged, uncharacteristically inarticulate. It wasn't what I thought it was, or who I thought she was, or maybe who I thought I was. I don't know. There was a vulnerability in his admission that the old Megan, the one who had loved him, supported him, built a life with him, might have responded to with compassion or even reconciliation. But that woman was gone, transformed by betrayal, and its aftermath into someone with clearer boundaries and a more calibrated emotional compass. I hope you find more clarity moving forward, I said sincerely. You're too talented to waste time on relationships built on illusions, professional, or personal. He accepted this limited offering with a nod. You too, Megan, though you seem to have found your clarity already. After he left, I remained at the conference table, turning over our conversation in my mind. There had been a time when Nate's admission about Vanessa would have meant everything to me. Validation, vindication, perhaps even schadenfreude. Now it registered as merely informative, a footnote rather than a headline in the ongoing story of my life. This, I realized, was perhaps the most significant measure of my progress. Not the professional achievements or strategic victories, but this gradual emotional disentanglement, this recalibration of what and who mattered in my universe. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of due diligence meetings, client presentations, and continued operational improvements at Omni. The Horizon partnership moved steadily toward finalization, with legal teams from both sides working through the details of the investment agreement and Nate's exit package. Throughout this period, I maintained the balanced approach to work and personal life that Alicia had advocated. I left the office at reasonable hours, protected my weekends for rejuvenation rather than catching up on email, and continued adding personal touches to my apartment, transforming it from a temporary landing place to a true home. I also reconnected with interests and people I had neglected during my marriage and its tumultuous end. I joined a book club focused on international fiction, something I'd always wanted to do but had dismissed as too time-consuming when managing Nate's social expectations alongside my own career. I resumed regular dinners with my parents, no longer filtering my experiences through the lens of what Nate would find interesting or appropriate to share. One Saturday morning in early June, I was enjoying coffee on my balcony, savoring the perfect spring weather, when my phone rang with a call from Tyler. "Morning, big brother," I answered cheerfully. "What is you calling before noon on a weekend?" "Can't a concerned sibling check in without an ulterior motive?" he replied, echoing Harold's words from weeks earlier. "They can," I laughed. "But in my experience, you specifically always have a reason for early morning calls." "Fair enough," Tyler conceded. "I heard through the grapevine that Omni's closing a deal with Horizon Ventures. Congratulations seem in order." "News travels fast," I observed, unsurprised that Tyler, with his extensive connections in Oak Ridge's business community, had caught wind of the pending transaction. "We're in the final stages. The board votes next week, but it's essentially a formality at this point." "That's fantastic, Meg. And Nate's completely out?" "Clean exit," I confirmed. "Generous compensation package in exchange for his shares and a 3-year non-compete. So he can't immediately start a competitor. Smart. It protects Omni's market position during a critical growth phase," I explained, "and gives him runway to explore ventures in adjacent spaces without directly competing." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "You sound remarkably objective about all this, given the history." His observation echoed my own recent reflections. "I am," I acknowledged. "The professional decisions make sense independent of the personal. History. That's progress, I think." "Significant progress," Tyler agreed. "A few months ago, you were buying his company as revenge for his affair." I winced slightly at the blunt characterization, though it wasn't entirely inaccurate. "That's a simplification, but not entirely wrong. My motives have evolved." "Along with you," Tyler said warmly, "which is actually why I'm calling. I have a proposition for you. Strictly social, nothing business-related." "I'm intrigued," I replied, sipping my coffee. "What kind of proposition?" "A weekend at Lake Chatham. My college roommate Mark has a lake house he's not using next weekend, and he offered it to me. I thought it might be nice for you to get completely away from Oak Ridge for a couple days. Clear your head before the board vote and all the transitions ahead." The invitation was tempting. Lake Chatham was about 3 hours north of Oak Ridge, renowned for its crystalline waters and surrounding hiking trails. A brief escape from the city and its associations might be exactly what I needed, before the final phase of Omni's transformation and my own professional repositioning. That sounds perfect, actually, I said, surprised by how appealing the prospect of a quiet weekend away felt. Just the two of us? Well, that's the other thing, Tyler hedged, a note of hesitation entering his voice. Mark's brother David will be there. He's staying in the guest cabin on the property while between assignments. He's a photojournalist, he added quickly, as if anticipating my objection to an unexpected third party. Tyler, I said suspiciously, is this a setup? Not a setup, he protested unconvincingly. Just a purposeful introduction. David's a great guy. Recently divorced himself, so he understands the territory. Smart, interesting, no drama. You'd have separate accommodations and zero pressure. Just good conversation and maybe a hiking companion if you want one. I sighed, torn between amusement and irritation at my brother's transparent matchmaking. I'm not ready to date, Ty. I'm barely 6 weeks divorced. Who said anything about dating? He replied innocently. I'm talking about expanding your social circle with someone who might have an interesting perspective. Someone who isn't connected to your work or your history with Nate. Put that way, it didn't sound entirely unreasonable. And truthfully, the idea of male company that wasn't associated with Omni or the divorce held a certain appeal. Not for romantic reasons, but for the simple pleasure of conversation uncomplicated by professional hierarchies or shared history. Fine, I relented, but be very clear with this David person that I'm not in the market for a relationship. I don't want any misunderstandings. Crystal clear, Tyler promised, not quite suppressing his satisfaction at my agreement. We'll leave Friday afternoon. I'll pick you up at 4. After we hung up, I remained on the balcony, contemplating this unexpected development. The lake weekend represented another small step in rebuilding a life independent of Nate and Omni. A life with room for spontaneity, new connections, and experiences chosen for their intrinsic appeal, rather than strategic value. The thought was both exhilarating and mildly terrifying. For so long, I had defined myself through professional achievement, and then through my marriage. Now I was learning to exist without these external definitions, to make choices based on what brought me genuine satisfaction rather than what advanced my career or pleased my husband. The week leading up to the board vote passed quickly, filled with final preparations and contingency planning. Justin and I worked closely to ensure Omni was positioned for a smooth transition once the Horizon partnership became official. We conducted departmental meetings to address employee concerns, reassuring teams that the investment represented growth opportunity rather than restructuring threat. Nate maintained his supportive stance throughout this process, which continued to surprise and occasionally unsettle me. The man who had once fought tenaciously for control in all circumstances, personal and professional, now seemed almost serene about relinquishing his connection to the company he had founded. You're handling this with remarkable grace, I observed during one of our transition planning sessions. It's not what I expected. Nate considered this for a moment before responding. I've had a lot of time to reflect recently. On Omni, on our marriage, on the kind of person I've been. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I didn't like what I saw in that reflection, Megan. The entitlement, the selfishness, the need to control outcomes regardless of impact on others. His self-awareness caught me off guard. This was not the Nate I had known, or thought I had known, during our marriage. What changed? I asked, genuinely curious. Besides losing my wife, my company, and my self-respect in the span of a few months, he replied with a wry smile. I started therapy, actually. Intensive work on understanding patterns I've repeated my entire adult life. The revelation was unexpected. Nate had always dismissed therapy as navel-gazing, preferring action to introspection in all areas of life. That's commendable, I said. unsure how else to respond to this glimpse of genuine growth in a man I had written off as irredeemably self-centered. "Don't sound so surprised," he said, a trace of the old Nate's defensiveness briefly surfacing. "Even I can recognize when I've hit rock bottom." "I didn't mean—" "I know," he interrupted, his tone softening. "And you're right to be skeptical. Words are easy. Sustained change is hard. But I'm trying, Megan. Not to win you back or undo what happened between us, but because I don't want to be that person anymore." The sincerity in his voice suggested this wasn't merely performative contrition, but genuine introspection. I found myself hoping, somewhat to my own surprise, that his efforts at personal growth would succeed, not for my sake, but for his own, and for whoever might be part of his future. "I wish you well with that journey," I said simply. "I mean, that." Our conversation shifted back to business matters after that brief detour into personal territory, but the exchange lingered with me throughout the day. There was something fitting in the parallel transformations occurring: Nate's internal work on his character, my reclamation of identity beyond our marriage, Omni's evolution from founder-led startup to professionally managed growth company. Different paths, but all moving toward healthier, more sustainable futures. Thursday morning, the day before the board vote and my weekend escape to Lake Chatham, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, intending to clear my desk of routine matters before the day's packed schedule. To my surprise, I found Justin, already in the conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets and looking uncharacteristically tense. "Problem?" I asked, setting down my coffee. He glanced up, visibly startled by my arrival. "Potentially, I was just about to call you. What's happened?" "Westlake reached out to 2 board members directly last night," he explained, pushing a document toward me. "They've increased their acquisition offer by 20% and added significant earnouts for key executives, including a special retention package for Nate if he agrees to stay on for 3 years post-acquisition." I skimmed the updated proposal, my mind racing to process this 11th-hour complication. The financial terms were indeed substantially improved from Westlake's original offer, making it potentially more attractive than Horizon's partnership proposal from a purely monetary perspective. "Who on the board received this?" I asked, mentally cataloging potential allies and obstacles. "Wexler and Chen," Justin replied, naming the 2 most finance-focused directors. "They're obligated to present it for consideration at tomorrow's meeting." "Of course they are," I muttered, considering the implications. "This is clearly time to disrupt the Horizon vote." Justin nodded grimly. "Westlake's CEO is known for aggressive tactics. The question is whether this changes the calculus enough to sway the board." I studied the proposal more carefully, noting the structure of the deal and particularly the special provisions for Nate. "Have you spoken with Nate about this? The retention package is clearly designed to drive a wedge between us." "Not yet. I only learned about it 30 minutes ago." Before I could respond, my phone rang with a call from Harold. Clearly, news of Westlake's counteroffer was traveling fast. "I assume you've seen Westlake's revised proposal," Harold said without preamble when I answered. "Just reviewing it now," I confirmed. "Interesting timing." "Classic spoiler tactic," Harold agreed, his tone suggesting he'd seen this maneuver many times before. "The question is how you want to respond. Horizon could potentially match the financial terms, but that would change the fundamental nature of our partnership proposal." I considered our options carefully. "Let me speak with Nate and gauge the board's temperature. We should know by midday whether this represents a serious threat to our arrangement or just a desperate last-minute play." After ending the call with Harold, I asked Justin to contact Nate and request an immediate meeting. Within 30 minutes, the 3 of us were sequestered in my office, reviewing Westlake's counteroffer together. "Did you know this was coming?" I asked Nate directly, watching his reaction closely. "Absolutely not," he replied, looking genuinely surprised as he reviewed the documents. Though in retrospect, I should have anticipated something like this. Westlake's CEO has a reputation for dramatic 11th-hour maneuvers. The retention package specifically targeting you suggests they believe you're key to their strategy, Justin observed, or at least to disrupting our current plan. Nate shook his head, still studying the proposal. This isn't about my technical knowledge or client relationships. It's about optics. They're trying to create the narrative that the founder is being pushed out against his will, and they're riding to the rescue. His assessment aligned with my own reading of the situation. The question is whether it will work, I said. Wexler and Chen are pragmatists. If the financial differential is significant enough, they might advocate for reconsidering our direction. So what's our countermove? Justin asked, looking between Nate and me. I considered the question, mentally gaming out various scenarios and their likely outcomes. The simplest solution would be asking Horizon to match Westlake's improved financial terms, but that felt reactive rather than strategic. Moreover, it potentially sacrificed the thoughtful structure of the Horizon partnership for a short-term financial win. I think we need to reframe the conversation entirely, I said slowly, an idea taking shape. This isn't simply about financial terms. It's about Omni's future identity and market position. Nate nodded, seeming to follow my thinking. Horizon offers strategic partnership while preserving Omni's independence. Westlake would absorb us into their existing structure. Exactly, I agreed. We need to make tomorrow's discussion about long-term vision, not short-term financial gain. That might sway some of the board, Justin acknowledged, but Wexler and Chen are focused on maximizing shareholder value. They'll want concrete numbers, not abstract visions. He was right, of course. The financial differential between the offers was substantial enough that it couldn't be dismissed with purely strategic arguments. What if we could offer them both? Nate suggested unexpectedly. The strategic benefits of the Horizon partnership, and financial terms competitive with Westlake's offer? I turned to him, curious. What are you thinking? My exit package, he said simply. It represents a significant portion of the deal's value. If I were to accept less, substantially less, the financial resources could be redirected to improve terms for other shareholders. The proposal caught me completely off guard. Nate was effectively offering to sacrifice millions of dollars in personal compensation to preserve Omni's independence and our planned partnership with Horizon. Why would you do that? I asked, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice. Your share value is rightfully earned. It's not just a golden parachute. Because Westlake would dismantle everything we've built, he replied with unexpected passion. The culture, the product direction, the client relationships, all subordinated to their existing business model. They're buying market share and talent, not vision. He paused, meeting my gaze directly. And because I believe in what you're doing with Omni, Megan, the direction you've taken the company these past months is better than where I was heading. It deserves a chance to fully develop. His sincerity seemed genuine, but I remained cautious. This is a significant financial sacrifice, Nate. Are you certain you've thought through the implications? I have, he assured me. I'm not acting from impulse here. The reduced exit package would still provide ample funding for my next venture, and the non-compete would remain the same. It's a reasonable adjustment that serves everyone's interests, except Westlake's, of course. Justin, who had been observing our exchange thoughtfully, spoke up. This could work. If we recalculate the shareholder distribution using Nate's revised exit terms, we could present a modified Horizon proposal that addresses the board's fiduciary concerns while preserving the strategic partnership structure. We'd need to move quickly, I noted. Harold and the Horizon team would need to review and approve the revisions before tomorrow's board meeting. I'll call Harold, Nate offered, surprising me again with his proactive support. We've known each other for years. I can explain my position directly and expedite the process. The next several hours passed in a flurry of revisions, calculations, and conference calls as we worked to restructure the Horizon proposal in response to Westlake's counteroffer. Nate was true to his word, working tirelessly alongside us to develop a solution that preserved the strategic partnership while improving the financial terms for remaining shareholders. By late afternoon, we had a revised framework that Harold and Horizon's investment committee had preliminarily approved. The new structure reduced Nate's exit package by nearly 30%, redirecting those resources to enhanced terms for other shareholders and additional growth capital for Omni's expansion plans. I've spoken privately with Wexler and Chen. Nate informed us as we finalized the presentation for the following day's board meeting. They're receptive to our revised approach, particularly the increased growth capital allocation. I think we've neutralized Westlake's gambit. I studied him across the conference table, still processing this unexpected alliance with the man who had once been my husband, then my adversary, and now, improbably, my partner in securing Omni's future. Thank you, I said sincerely. Your willingness to restructure your exit terms made this possible. Nate shrugged, a hint of his old confidence returning. It's the right move for everyone. Besides, he added with a small smile, there's a certain satisfaction in outmaneuvering Westlake's CEO. He's always been insufferably smug at industry events. The moment of shared conspiracy, us against a common competitor, felt strangely normal, as if we had temporarily stepped into an alternate timeline where our personal history was secondary to our professional partnership. It was both disconcerting and oddly comfortable, a reminder of the genuine connection that had existed between us before everything unraveled. We should all get some rest, Justin suggested, glancing at his watch. Tomorrow will be intense regardless of how well prepared we are. As we gathered our materials to leave, Nate paused by the door. For what it's worth, Megan, I meant what I said earlier. I believe in the direction you're taking Omni. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've proven yourself as a leader in ways I never managed to do. The compliment was unexpected, and, I sensed, entirely genuine. That means a lot coming. From you, Nate. Thank you. Friday morning arrived with the nervous energy that precedes any major corporate decision. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock, with presentations from both the Horizon team and, now, representatives from Westlake, who had been hastily invited to present their counteroffer. I arrived early, reviewing my notes and centering myself for what promised to be a challenging session. Justin joined me shortly after, his calm presence reassuring as always. Ready for this? He asked, setting down 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for me. As ready as possible, I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Nate's conversations with Wexler and Chen seem promising, but board dynamics can be unpredictable. True, Justin acknowledged. But we have a strong case and the right team to make it. That counts for a lot. The board meeting unfolded much as we had anticipated. Harold and the Horizon team presented first, outlining their revised partnership proposal with the enhanced financial terms made possible by Nate's restructured exit package. They emphasized the strategic alignment between Horizon's investment, philosophy, and Omni's product direction, the growth capital that would accelerate our expansion plans, and the governance structure that would preserve Omni's operational independence. Westlake followed with a polished presentation of their acquisition offer, focusing primarily on the premium valuation and potential synergies between our product lines. Their CEO, Martin Grayson, was smooth and persuasive, painting a vision of Omni as a critical component in Westlake's integrated enterprise solution. Integration is where true value is created, Grayson concluded confidently. Standalone operations cannot achieve the scale efficiencies and market penetration that full incorporation into Westlake's platform would provide. After both presentations concluded, the board entered closed deliberations, excluding all non-directors from the room. The waiting period that followed was excruciating. 2 hours of nervous pacing and speculative conversation as Harold, Justin, the Westlake team, and I awaited the board's decision. Nate found me in the small breakout room where I'd retreated to review emails and distract myself from the wait. "Holding up okay?" he asked, closing the door behind him. "Managing," I replied, though I'd forgotten how stressful these inflection points can be. "The board dynamics looked positive from where I was sitting," he offered. Chen was particularly engaged during Horizon's technical integration discussion. That's usually a good sign with him. "I noticed that too," I agreed. Though Westlake made a compelling financial case. "Numbers without vision," Nate dismissed. "Grayson doesn't understand what makes Omni special. To him, we're just features to be absorbed and client relationships to be leveraged." His defense of Omni's unique value reminded me briefly of the passionate founder I had fallen in love with years ago, the man who could talk for hours about the transformative potential of the technology he was building. That authentic core had been obscured in recent years by ego and ambition, but perhaps it had never entirely disappeared. "Whatever happens," I said impulsively, "I want you to know I appreciate how you've handled this transition. It hasn't been easy for either of us, but you've been unexpectedly supportive." Nate seemed momentarily taken aback by my candor. "I've had a lot to atone for," he said finally. "Supporting your leadership of Omni feels like the right place to start." Before we could continue this unexpected moment of connection, Justin appeared at the door. "They're ready for us. The board has reached a decision." The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of formalities and corporate governance. Procedures. Thomas Wexler, as board chair, announced the outcome with characteristic precision. Horizon's revised partnership proposal had been approved by unanimous vote. Westlake's counteroffer, while financially compelling, had been deemed less aligned with Omni's long-term strategic interests. Martin Grayson accepted the decision with professional courtesy that barely masked his disappointment. Harold caught my eye across the room, his slight nod conveying satisfaction with the outcome we had worked so hard to secure. As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, a curious sense of anticlimax settled over me. This pivotal moment, the culmination of months of strategic maneuvering following my impulsive acquisition of Nate's company, felt somehow less dramatic than I had anticipated. Perhaps because the true transformations had already occurred internally, rendering the external validation almost secondary. Later that afternoon, as I finalized preparations for the weekend at Lake Chatham, Tyler texted to confirm our departure time. "Packed and ready for 4 p.m. pickup? Fair warning, I have excellent playlists prepared for the drive." I smiled at his enthusiasm. "Ready and looking forward to it," I replied. "Even the playlists." As I closed my suitcase, my phone rang with a call from Harold. "Congratulations, CEO," he greeted me warmly. "Today's outcome positions both Omni and you personally for remarkable growth." "Thank you for your confidence in both," I replied, genuinely appreciative of his unwavering support throughout this complex process. "You've earned it," he assured me. "Now, I assume you're taking some well-deserved time to decompress this weekend?" "Actually, yes. A lakeside retreat with my brother. No email, no calls, just nature and quiet." "Perfect," Harold approved. "When you return, we'll begin planning the next phase of this journey. Your transition back to Horizon is still approximately 24 months away, but it's not too early to consider who might succeed you at Omni when that time comes." His mention of succession planning, a necessary but often neglected aspect of leadership, reminded me how far I had traveled from the reactive, emotionally driven decision-maker who had orchestrated the hostile takeover of her husband's company. That woman had been focused solely on immediate control and vindication. The person I had become was thinking about legacy, about sustainable leadership beyond my tenure. "I have some preliminary thoughts on that front," I told Harold, "but let's discuss after the weekend." I want to approach it with a clear mind. After ending the call, I stood for a moment in my apartment. This space that had transformed from a hasty refuge to a true home over the past months. The journey from that explosive birthday dinner to this moment of quiet resolution had not followed any path I could have anticipated or planned. Yet standing here now, I felt a deep sense of rightness, of alignment between my external circumstances and internal truth. The doorbell rang precisely at 4 o'clock. Tyler's punctuality, as reliable as ever. As I descended in the elevator with my weekend bag, I felt a lightness that had nothing to do with the board's decision or the professional milestone achieved today. It was something more fundamental, the sensation of moving forward unburdened by the weight of past betrayals or the need for vindication. The woman who had sat across from her husband at that birthday dinner, watching in stunned silence as he announced his intention to leave her for another woman, had been defined by her marriage and then by its dramatic dissolution. The person stepping into Tyler's car for a weekend of simple pleasures and new connections was defined by something entirely different, by choices made deliberately, by a future crafted intentionally, by a self rediscovered and reconstructed from authentic elements. "Ready for adventure?" Tyler asked as I settled into the passenger seat. I glanced back briefly at my building, thinking not of what I was leaving behind, but of what I was carrying forward. "More than ready," I replied with genuine anticipation. "Let's go." As we pulled away from the curb, merging into the Friday afternoon traffic heading out of the city, I felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected second act, not the one I had planned or imagined, but perhaps exactly the one I needed. The road ahead might not be perfectly mapped, but I was finally driving it on my own terms, eyes open, hands steady on the wheel. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.